He just wanted to hold an old rifle, a ghost from his past. Instead, they laughed at his limp, called him Grandpa, and kicked him out. They had no idea who they just disrespected. The bell above the door of Patriot Arms and Ordnance chimed softly as James Beckett, a man who seemed to carry the weight of 80 hard years on his stooped shoulders, shuffled in. His silver-white hair was sparse and thin beneath a faded Navy SEAL baseball cap, its once proud trident emblem now barely visible. Deep, weathered lines carved a map of a long life onto his face, a face that held a kind, almost pitiful gentleness in its faded blue eyes. He wore a very plain, threadbare flannel shirt, patched jeans, and worn-down work boots, and leaned slightly on an old wooden cane as he moved with a noticeable limp. He didn't browse. He headed directly to the polished glass counter where two young clerks in their early 20s were absorbed in their phones, country music humming Epsilon Tau Alpha Iota Rho Epsilon Alpha Ly from overhead speakers. Beckett waited patiently. Eventually, one clerk, a kid with a wispy goatee and an air of bored superiority, looked up. "Help you with something, Pops?" "Yes, son," Beckett's voice was quiet, a little raspy. "You have an M1 Garand replica, back wall. Real wood stock. Wondered if I might see it." "Hold it for a moment." The kid snorted. "That thing? It's a collector's item. Heavy as all get out. Not really for, handling by just anyone." The second clerk, sporting a tactical expert t-shirt, sauntered over, a smirk playing on his lips. "Yeah, Grandpa, that rifle's probably heavier than you are. Might throw your back out just looking at it." Beckett's gaze didn't waver. "Carried one a long way, a long time ago. Through jungles you've only seen in movies. Figure I can manage it across your counter." The first clerk burst out laughing. "Okay, Rambo. Look, unless you're planning on buying, and that piece ain't cheap, you're kind of taking up valuable air. We got real customers to think about. This ain't a museum, old-timer," the second added, already turning back to his phone. "Time to move along." A flicker of something unreadable passed through Beckett's eyes, a shadow from a distant battlefield. He looked down at his gnarled hands resting on the counter, then slowly nodded. "Understood," he said, his voice barely a whisper. He turned, his stooped frame moving with a slow, pained dignity, and walked out, the door chiming softly behind him. The clerks exchanged amused glances and went back to their screens. Neither of them noticed the woman in her mid-30s standing near the ammunition racks, dressed in a nondescript gray hoodie, a simple ball cap pulled low over her eyes. She'd watched the entire exchange, her expression unreadable. As Beckett cleared the door, she calmly walked outside, pulled a sleek smartphone from her pocket, and made a single, brief call. Her words were few, spoken in a low, even tone. He was here. Patriot Arms. Disrespected. Badly. She listened for a moment, then said, "Understood." The call ended. She glanced back at the gun shop, then walked briskly away. The clock on a nearby bank display read 10:44 a.m. At exactly 11:43 a.m., the quiet of the strip mall parking lot was broken by the arrival of a matte black Chevrolet Suburban. It pulled into a spot directly facing Patriot Arms and Ordnance, its engine a low, powerful hum. A minute later, a second identical SUV glided in beside it. Then a third. No doors opened. No one got out. The vehicles just sat there, dark-tinted windows reflecting the midday sun, exuding an almost palpable sense of coiled energy and unspoken purpose. Inside the gun shop, the two clerks were oblivious, still joking about the crazy old coot. The bell above the door chimed again, and again, and again, as if a procession had begun. 12 men. They filed in one by one, their movements economical, precise, utterly silent. Some wore rugged civilian attire, jeans, work shirts, boots, that somehow looked more tactical than any uniform. Others wore elements of Navy dress uniforms, crisp and immaculate, suggesting they'd come from an official function. Their ages varied, from men in their late 30s to a few clearly in their 50s or 60s, but all shared an unmistakable bearing, shoulders square, eyes constantly scanning, an aura of quiet, absolute confidence that had nothing to do with arrogance and everything to do with capability. They fanned out, forming a silent, imposing semicircle facing the counter, their presence instantly sucking the levity from the room. The clerk with the goatee, still chuckling, finally looked up from his phone. "Hey there, gents. Welcome to Patriot Arms. What can His voice trailed off as he took in the silent, unsmiling assembly before him. His eyes widened. The other clerk froze mid-scroll. The country music suddenly sounded tinny and absurd. The oldest of the newcomers, a man with close-cropped, iron-gray hair, a square jaw, and eyes that had seen too much, stepped forward. His chest was a block of ribbons above a Navy SEAL trident. His voice, when he spoke, was not loud, but it resonated with a power that made the polished rifles on the walls seem to vibrate. "1 hour ago," he said, his tone flat, devoid of emotion, "one of our own walked through that door." The second clerk, the one who'd called Beckett Grandpa, swallowed audibly, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Yes, sir, I think there might be a misunderstanding." The lead SEAL cut him off with a look so cold it could have frozen fire. "He didn't come here for honors," the SEAL continued, his voice unwavering. "He didn't ask to be recognized. He simply wanted to hold a rifle he hadn't touched since a war most of you weren't alive to remember. Your staff here," his gaze flicked contemptuously over the two now terrified clerks, laughed at him. "They mocked his injuries. They called him names. They told him to leave because he wasn't a real customer." He reached into his pocket and placed a small, carefully folded object on the glass countertop. It was a U.S. flag patch, scorched and stained, the colors faded but the stars and stripes still defiant. "He pulled this patch from my uniform when I was bleeding out in a Helmand firefight," the lead SEAL stated, his voice still level but now carrying a profound, personal weight. "Carried me 3 clicks under heavy fire to the extraction point. Took 2 rounds himself doing it. Never said a word about it afterwards. Never asked for a damn thing." Another SEAL, younger but with the same hard eyes, stepped forward and laid a worn, black and white photograph beside the patch. It showed a group of 8 heavily armed young men in combat gear, grinning tiredly in some dusty, war-torn landscape. In the center, unmistakable despite the youth and the grime, was James Beckett. The goateed clerk's mouth fell open. His face was ashen. I didn't know," he stammered. "We didn't know who he was." The lead SEAL nodded slowly, a gesture of grim acknowledgement. "Exactly," he said, the 2 words landing with the force of a gavel. "You didn't know. You didn't ask. You didn't care. There were no threats made, no demands for an apology, no raised voices. Just the unvarnished truth, delivered with the chilling precision of a surgical strike." Then, as one, the lead SEAL turned. The others pivoted in perfect synchronicity. 12 men, walking out of the gun shop as silently and deliberately as they had entered, leaving behind a silence more profound than any gunshot. The SEALs exited Patriot Arms and Ordnance, the door chiming softly behind each man. They didn't look back. They moved across the parking lot with the same unhurried, purposeful gait, got into their black SUVs, and drove away, one after another, as if they had merely completed a routine inspection. But the atmosphere they left behind in the gun shop was anything but routine. It was thick with a stunned, suffocating silence. The 2 young clerks remained frozen behind the counter, staring at the scorched flag patch and the old photograph. The one with the goatee slowly sank onto his stool, his face pale. The other kept wiping his sweaty palms on his jeans. A customer, a middle-aged man in a hunting vest who had entered just as the SEALs were arriving and had witnessed the entire silent confrontation, let out a shaky breath. He'd been about to ask about a new scope, but the words died in his throat. He quietly took out his phone and, with trembling hands, snapped a photo of the items on the counter, the empty space where the seals had stood still radiating an almost physical presence. By 1:45 p.m., that photo, captioned simply, "When you disrespect a seal at Patriot Arms, you get a visit from the whole damn team." No words needed, was rocketing through veteran-focused Facebook groups and online forums. Initially, it was shared with a mixture of grim satisfaction and professional curiosity. Then the questions began: who was the old guy they stood up for? By 2:12 p.m., the name James C. Beckett began to surface. Local Briar Ridge residents who frequented those forums started connecting the dots. "That sounds like old man Beckett," one posted. "Quiet guy, limps a bit, always wears that faded seal cap. Never says much." Another added, "My dad served with a Beckett in Vietnam. Said he was a ghost, a legend. Pulled off impossible rescues, never talked about it." Then, someone with access to declassified archives uploaded a scanned, heavily redacted personnel summary: Beckett, James C., Master Chief Special Warfare Operator, SEAL, Ret. Service, 1966 to 2004. Teams, SEAL Team 3. Deployments, Vietnam, multiple tours, Panama, Mogadishu, Iraq, Desert Storm/OIF. Commendations, Silver Star, Bronze Star, with V device, multiple awards, Purple Heart, multiple awards, numerous other citations classified. No personal details, no flowery prose, just a stark, undeniable record of decades spent in the crucible. The gun shop manager, Tom Strickland, a man in his late 50s who usually left the day-to-day to his young staff, arrived around 3 p.m., his phone buzzing with frantic texts from other local business owners who'd seen the rapidly spreading online posts. He walked in to find his two clerks looking like they'd seen a gathering of ghosts. The photo and the scorched patch were still on the counter. Strickland, himself a Marine veteran of Beirut, understood instantly. He didn't yell. He didn't ask for explanations. He simply walked to the back wall, carefully took down the M1 Garand replica, the very rifle Beckett had asked to see, and placed it gently on the counter beside the photograph. He then found a small, clear acrylic stand and a piece of cardstock. With a pen, he wrote a single line: "He carried it for us. We will carry the memory." He propped the sign beside the rifle. The town of Briar Ridge, a place that had largely overlooked James Beckett for years, began to remember. Or rather, it began to learn. The local online community page was flooded with comments, shares of his service record, and expressions of shame and respect. Someone anonymously left a single white rose at the gun shop door. Then a VFW challenge coin appeared beside it. Then another. By nightfall, a small, impromptu collection of tributes had formed. People drove by slowly, some stopping to look, not with morbid curiosity, but with a new, profound understanding. James Beckett, meanwhile, was unaware of the digital storm raging in his name. He had returned to his small, tidy rental house on the edge of town, eaten a simple lunch, and was likely tending his small vegetable garden or reading an old paperback. His routine was sacrosanct, a bulwark against memories he rarely allowed to surface. But as he took his usual late afternoon walk to the corner store for the evening paper, he noticed something different. People didn't just glance past him anymore. They looked. Some nodded, a new respect in their eyes. One man, a younger veteran Beckett vaguely recognized from the VFW, simply stopped, came to a quiet position of attention as Beckett passed, then continued on his way. Beckett, perplexed but accustomed to the world's strangeness, merely nodded back and continued his unhurried, limping pace. The quiet dignity of James Beckett, and the unwavering loyalty of his SEAL brothers, had spoken more eloquently than any shouted demand or public protest. In the days that followed, the gun shop became an unofficial point of reflection. Veterans from around the county would stop by, not always to buy, but to look at the M1 Garand, the photo, the scorched patch. They'd share quiet stories with Strickland, who now often worked the counter himself. The two young clerks, profoundly humbled, had asked to keep their jobs. Strickland agreed, on the condition they learn every detail of Beckett's declassified service record and treat every single customer, regardless of appearance, with the utmost respect. It was a lesson they embraced with chastened sincerity. A history teacher at Briar Ridge High, inspired by the events, invited local veterans to speak to her class. Beckett, predictably, did not respond to the invitation. But a week later, the school principal received an anonymous, typed letter. It contained no sender, no signature, just a meticulously detailed account of a daring nighttime extraction of a downed aircrew from deep within enemy territory in 1970, signed only with the call sign, Nighthawk. The details matched a little-known action for which a then-Lieutenant, J.G. James Beckett had received a commendation. The letter was framed and hung in the school library. 2 weeks after the gun shop incident, as James Beckett sat in his usual back booth at Rosie's Diner, sipping his black coffee, the door opened. The same 12 men who had visited the gun shop filed in. They didn't speak to the waitress, didn't look for a table. They walked directly to Beckett's booth and stood there, in a silent semicircle, just as they had at the store. Beckett slowly looked up from his newspaper, his faded blue eyes meeting those of the lead SEAL, the one whose life he'd saved. For a long moment, no one in the diner moved or spoke. Then the youngest of the group, a fresh-faced SEAL barely out of BUD/S, cleared his throat. "Master Chief," he said, his voice full of a respect that bordered on reverence. "If it's all right with you, sir, we'd be honored to share your coffee." Beckett looked at each man, then gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Without a word, the SEALs pulled up chairs, some squeezing into the booth, others around it. The waitress, Rosie herself, who'd known Beckett as a quiet regular for years, brought over a dozen more mugs and several pots of fresh coffee, her eyes shining. For the next hour, the group sat, mostly in comfortable silence, a silent testament to a bond forged in hardship, loyalty, and an unbreakable code that few outside their world could ever truly understand. The quiet old man with the limp was not alone. He never had been. What does true loyalty look like to you? And how do we ensure that the sacrifices of our quiet heroes are never forgotten? Share your thoughts on this story in the comments below. Please, always comment with respect. Subscribe for more stories that honor the unspoken bonds and the everyday courage that surrounds us.